Do you like castles? I do. I like them very much. Castles remind us of a bygone era, an era of feudal lords, of knights in armor, of kings who sometimes warred with each other, or of throne aspirants who would have given anything to sit on that throne and be recognized as lords of a territory. In short, castles are something wonderful, fantastic. They stimulate the imagination. Castles sometimes also guard tyrants, tyrants who come from outside, who aspire to erase everything that was there before them, to impose their figure, their name, their politics, their will for absolute dominance. These tyrants who settle in castles unconsciously want to be them, the absolute lords, not only of the castle, but of history. Fortunately, history always decides otherwise. And like a deity playing dice, well, those dice that come out of the lottery drum thrown by history, they give and return a different fate, even to those who would like to elect themselves, proclaim themselves king among men, but in the end is just a bloody tyrant. Today we talk about one of these characters, a character who, from a magnificent castle, decided on the life and especially the death of millions of people. A ruthless man who, even at the end of his own life, had the courage to dissociate himself from himself. An incredible man, a man who could be defined as the son of the pen of some fantasy writer. Yet he was a real man, a terrible man, a man whose name is known even in courtrooms, Hans Frank. If you go to Krakow today, this beautiful city in the south of Poland, do you still see him? That castle is the Wawel Castle, Zamek na Wawelu. Wawel is the name of a hill overlooking the city of Krakow. On that hill, there is this beautiful castle which combines several styles: the Romanesque, the Renaissance, the Baroque. It is the result of an evolution that starts from the 8th century AD and reaches up to our days. Wawel for the Poles is a symbol. It is primarily a royal symbol. The kings of Poland were crowned within the walls of Wawel Castle, and when they died, they were buried in the crypt of the church of Wawel Castle. This shows how much Wawel is a truly special place for the Poles, since 1320 when Ladislaus Thieter was crowned there, and the tradition of the Polish kings continued according to the historical period, with Poland appearing and disappearing from maps that were contested by other states on whose throne various kings, various monarchs, sometimes even expression of other alliances, took turns. Poland disappears from the maps, as we have said many times, and reappears after the end of the Great War, after the Russian Revolution, after the Russian Civil War. From there, Poland takes shape again as an independent state, but as a republic, no longer as a monarchy. A republic that gradually transforms into a small dictatorship, that of Marshal Piłsudski. No more kings are crowned at Wawel until the end of 1939, when a new king, but he is not a blue-blooded man, arrives at Wawel. His name is Hans Frank, and he is a Reichsritter, that is, a Reich Minister Frank, when he arrives at Wawel. He is not yet 40 years old, yet he is already a man established in power, a power that he built in courtrooms, agreeing to defend in about 150 trials Adolf Hitler, him, the Führer, the man who changed the history of Germany. Hans Frank is his trusted defender. He is the one who sponsored him in an endless series of trials. And for this very reason, Hans Frank has gained great power. One of the first signs of the Führer's recognition towards Frank is his inclusion as the head of the list in the 1930 elections. So the assurance of a seat in the Reichstag, a seat that is confirmed time and time again in every election, at least as long as the elections make sense, at least as long as the elections are held. In 1933, Hans Frank becomes the Minister of Justice in Bavaria. He is already writing what should be his masterpiece, a book that he will publish in 1936 titled Lesers Überstellung und Aufgaben des Richters. That is, main notions about the position and duties of judges. It's a book that still helps to understand the psychology of Hans Frank today, which intends to subject the positivity of the law. and therefore the role of the judge called to decide and desired by the state has collapsed. Hans Frank also becomes director of the National Socialist Association of Jurists and president of the German Academy of Jurisprudence, a position he holds from 1933 to 1941, when he is already at Wawel. And in this role, he dictates the line on the conduct of lawyers, and not only in Germany. For example, as Frank is quite critical of extrajudicial executions, that is, death sentence pronounced and carried out within a few hours following the first purges. Remember the Night of the Long Knives? We talked about it in another video that you can find on the channel. That night, which actually also unfolds the following day, the Nazi Party cleanses its opponents, both internal ones like Ernst Röhm and old enemies like General Kurt von Schleicher, for example, or Strasser, who had opposed Hitler, embodying one of the activist and revolutionary wings of the Nazi Party. So, faced with those extrajudicial executions, Hans Frank objects. He objects from a legal standpoint, and he has the impression of being a clear-headed man in the middle of the storm. But this clarity implies something different, something more perverse, something that emerges from his appointment as the general governor of occupied Poland. On September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany attacks Poland, marking the start of World War II. It's a topic we've already covered many times, both in terms of the purely historical issue and the events leading up to it. For example, the fake attack on the Gleiwitz radio station, which we discussed in a dedicated video you can find on the channel. Well, Frank, when he settles inside Wawel Castle, has only one goal: to become the new king of Poland himself. Clearly, not officially, but he has received specific assignments. Poland, what remains of what was Poland, dismembered by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, with the eastern provinces annexed to the Soviet Union, and all the rest directly controlled by the Nazi establishment. All that territory must become a German colony, and Hans Frank receives precise directives. Our dear friend, the lawyer, Antonio Leggero, also reminds us that he was a welcome guest on our channel. With this book, a very interesting book, The Criminological Profile of the Nazi Hierarchs. Speaking of Hans Frank, for example, the lawyer Leggero reminds us how, in addition to the power struggles within Wawel, with Friedrich Wilhelm Krüger, State Secretary for Security and head of the SS within the general government, with his subsequent replacement with Kopp, well, our friend Hans Frank had several discussions to carry out a specific plan, and that plan involved only one thing: to create a unique zone for the Germans and in this way carry out the murder of millions of Poles and Jews, writes the lawyer Leggero on page 280 of his book. By the end of 1942, therefore, about 3 years after the beginning of Hans Frank's reign, 85% of the Jews in Frank's satrapy had been sent to extermination camps, and most of them were killed. 15% were conscripted for forced labor. It's a horrifying genocide that leads to the bloody reign of Hans Frank. Yes, Frank has very clear ideas. He has been given a task and it must be carried out to the end. Clearing Poland of all those underdeveloped subhumans, as they are defined within the Nazi rhetoric, to make room, living space, as it is said, for the new German recruits. It's a genocide program, and Frank carries it out methodically. He's not alone. In all of this, it should be remembered, Frank is very well assisted by his subordinates, by Krüger, with whom he sometimes clashes, so much so that Krüger will be replaced by Wilhelm Koppel, and then by two men. We crossed paths with one of them not long ago, Karl Eberhard Schöngart, who before being sent to the Netherlands is Frank's right-hand man, sometimes even in opposition to Krüger. The other is Hans Frank's deputy, Joseph Bühler. Bühler and Schöngart are sent by Frank on January 20th, 1942 to the infamous Wannsee Conference, the conference that decides the methods of extermination. Frank is determined in all this. Frank is feared. Every time he drives down from Babel Hill, the Poles turn their gaze away. They dare not look at the car and the escort, who descend and parade through the city. There is fear. The Poles also fear Hans Frank's wife, Brigitte Herbst. This is her name, 4 years older than her husband, mother of his 5 children. A rather libertine woman, she loved to indulge in various lovers, and who will later be repudiated by Frank, but without managing to get a divorce. Brigitte liked to be called Königin von Polen, Queen of Poland, because
After all, Hans
was its König. The king said, I prefer to be a widow. Rather than divorce a minister of the Reich, even though Hans Frank was much more than a simple minister of the Reich, he was a plenipotentiary. In Poland, paraphrasing a noted saying that is expressed elsewhere, not a leaf stirred. Whether Hans Frank wanted to or not, Frank could do what he wanted, even with the heritage of Poland. This is proven by the Wawel castle. When he settled there, Hans Frank interrupted some of the renovation works that had been launched by the Polish government. He orders the castle to be rebuilt in a different way, more in line with the German style, says Frank, or rather more in line with his and his queen, Brigitte's, desires. Frank doesn't stop at that. He is one of the many Nazis who loots art treasures. It's not just Hermann Goering who takes the best of the best from the occupied territories. There's also Frank, and like him, we've seen Schongart too. Frank, for example, smuggles many art objects and has them shipped abroad, or smuggles them, he
sells them for,
to enrich himself more and more in a disgusting way. Just think of a detail, the sherbek, which is the sword with which the Polish kings were crowned, and which the kings themselves used to define new nobles. The sherbek is stolen from Wawel under Frank's rule and will only be found in 1960 in Canada. It had been sold to unscrupulous art dealers who had paid very heavy sums to Wawel to subtract that sword. The paintings, the tapestries. During that period, a well-known painting by Leonardo also disappears from Poland, one of the few attributed to the great genius. The Lady with the Ermine, the portrait of Cecilia Gallerani, will be found years later. This to understand Hans Frank's lust for power and money. As for terror, he knew his stuff. He had the right men to impose his vision of terror on all of Poland. And so it would be until the end of 1944. Frank was not stupid. He had understood that the so-called 1,000-year Reich would not last 1,000 years, even though he kept repeating that what they were doing would be remembered in the millennium to come. Perhaps so, but not in the sense that Frank meant, not as magnificence, but as a memory of horror. Frank fled Cracovia shortly after Christmas, 1944. The Soviet troops have not arrived yet, but they will. A month later, he seeks refuge in the familiar region of Bavaria. On May 4th, 1945, an American patrol discovers him and arrests him at Tergens, not far from the Eagle's Nest in Berchtesgaden. In prison, Frank attempts suicide twice by cutting his veins, but he doesn't succeed. In Nuremberg, he dramatically declares that he has repented and converted to Christianity. This is where the drama happens. Hans Frank, also remembered by lawyer Leggero, dissociates himself. He says, I am two people and only one body. There's the Frank you see before you, and then there's the other one, the Nazi leader. And sometimes I wonder how that second Frank could have committed such atrocious crimes. If it was a technique to try to avoid hanging, no, it didn't work. We know that AS. Frank, sitting at the dock with the other major defendants of the Nazi regime, is accused of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and other related charges. His death sentence was carried out on October 16th, 1946, by hanging, in the order of the gallows. Frank is the fifth to climb the ladder and present himself to the executioner. His last words are, "Thank you for the treatment received during imprisonment. I ask God to accept me in his mercy." But can mercy be had for a person who in life wanted to elect himself king of an occupied land, a plundered land, a violated land, a bloodied land by his order? Can you have pity for someone who ordered the killing of millions of people? Can you have pity for someone who has posed as the master of the lives of millions of people and owner of property that did not belong to him? I leave the answer to this question to you. History has already answered about Hans Frank, attributing him not honors, but the responsibility of being a bloodthirsty tyrant, who, under the pretext of acting on behalf of others, on behalf of the Nazi regime, the governed general side of the German occupation force and Hitler, had aimed only at three objectives: personal wealth, power at all costs, and the blood of millions of innocents. Have you already gone to take a look at our official website? You will find many news. You will clearly find our videos, our stories, our articles. You will find our merchandising. You will obviously find the possibility to subscribe to our monthly newsletter, which is absolutely It will arrive at the beginning of each month in your mailbox with all our content, many exclusive and much, much, much more. It's a special service designed for all of you who love us, who follow us, who have long wanted to be in our company and always know more. The story, and I assure you, will continue to amaze you for a long time. So as always, see you Inside the Story here on the YouTube channel, on podcast platforms, and also on our website and in our newsletter.